Right, we're going live.
Okay, hi everybody. I am Professor Claire McElvaney. First, I want to thank you for coming to Promise Day. We ask that students put your name in the chat, first and last name. I realize it's tempting to get silly and say, I am Batman, but since some professors are going to be looking through to get your names for attendance, that won't help much. We don't know who Batman is. So first, this is one of the most important events to us every semester. It brings out a lot of discussion regarding what's going on in our society, what is and isn't domestic violence and sexual assault. But I have to say a big, big welcome, because normally this is a Wake Tech event. However, we have students joining us from UNC Pembroke. And I want to tell you how amazing that is to me, because the idea that people come together for a common cause, that's what makes a better world, in my opinion. So we are so grateful to have everyone here. Dr. Renee Lamphere will be speaking in just a minute, and I'll let Professor Roseman introduce. But I first want to give you just a really quick history as people are putting in their names. Promise Day started in 2017. It was meant to be a one-time sexual assault awareness event. And what we didn't expect was that 200 students would attend, and that over the next few weeks, we would get more and more comments from students who were asking for help and for resources. And it just exploded from there. So every fall, every spring, we do this for Wake Tech students. If you're interested in getting involved, we love student involvement. So you can contact Professor Roseman or myself. It was started by Abby Ryder, who's UNC Pembroke, Paige Roseman, and myself. So it really is the skeleton crew that says, what do students need? What do they want? So student impact makes us better. And we're very, very blessed that at Wake Tech, they're extremely supportive. We have the police like Charlie Coor, who've been with us from day one, the counselors, the SGA who's put in funding. We can't do it without them. And so we have events over the next 2 days. This is the first event, and one of the most amazing, Dr. Renee has spoken before to our school, and the student reaction was wonderful, because a lot of times when we think about domestic violence or sexual assault, we think of someone who's weak rather than someone who is intelligent and strong and capable. And this is what this is going to demonstrate to you, is what all is involved. This is not a simple issue of it did or didn't happen. It's not male versus female. It's not one set thing, and it can happen to anyone. So even if you think that you're safe and it can't happen to you, it may happen to someone you know. So we want you to know about the resources before it derails your success. So with that being said, before I turn it over to Professor Roseman, I do want to ask, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Please remember, this is a public chat. It can be seen by anyone, so please be respectful. And we will relay that to our speaker as we get near the end so that she can address all of these questions. So Professor Roseman, if you would welcome our speaker, please.
Thank you so much, Professor McElvaney. I just want to repeat that welcome. We're so happy to have everybody here today, and we are especially thrilled to have Dr. Renee Lamphere back with us. So just a brief bio so that you know a little bit more about her. Dr. Lamphere is an associate professor of criminal justice in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, or UNC-P. She earned her bachelor's degree from the State University of New York at Oswego, where she majored in communication studies and public justice. Her graduate studies were at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where she graduated with a master's degree in criminology in 2007 and a PhD in criminology in 2012. Her areas of interest include corrections, mixed methods research, family violence, school violence, and cyber and digital media crimes. Dr. Lamphere has a particular interest in teaching and pedagogy, and she's published in the Journal of Criminal Justice Education. She recently wrote a book chapter about teachers and their role in K-12 school violence. She also serves in so many capacities, including as a guardian ad litem in Robeson County, North Carolina, where she advocates for children in the foster care system. Dr. Lamphere is an advocate for sexual assault survivors. She actively promotes sexual assault awareness on college campuses, and her most recent research project examines the Me Too movement and sexual assault disclosure among college professors. We're just absolutely delighted to have you here this morning, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Renee.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Just give me 1 second. Um, I'm having problems getting to my PowerPoint. Just give me 1 second here. Um, I'm sorry, y'all. It's not popping. My PowerPoint isn't popping up on my screen. Can you see it now?
Let's see. Oh, for a second we could see your screen, but we weren't seeing your PowerPoint. We were actually just seeing this screen with us on it.
Okay. I'm not seeing the PowerPoint in the files anymore when I go to share it. Let me try closing the PowerPoint. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm going to try closing the PowerPoint and reopening it again.
No worries. No
That's,
worries at all.
and while Dr. Renee is working on that, just so the Wake Tech students know, and of course UNC-P, y'all are always welcome. There are 2 more events going on. So there will be an event today at 2, which is with Campus Resources. And we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do on campus when you see it. And then we have an event tomorrow, which is Sharice Potts from Interact, and she's going to talk about a little bit about the warning signs that you see, because a lot of times you don't recognize what's happening until it's too late. So how are we doing with the PowerPoint?
I found it. I got it.
You got it.
I just had to reopen it, close it, and reopen it. So I'm ready to start.
Technology's fun, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Okay, great. Okay, let me start. You can see that now, I hope. And
Yes.
okay, great. So good morning again, everybody. My name is Dr. Lamphere. Like they said, I'm an associate professor at UNC Pembroke in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. I want to take a minute to first say thank you to everyone who's taking the time to join us this morning and hear my Promise Day lecture. I also want to especially thank the staff at Wake Tech for asking me to be a part of this event. So we're here today celebrating Promise Day and also honoring October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Some of you might remember me. I gave a lecture a few years ago for Promise Day events at Wake Tech. At that time, I spoke about being a survivor of sexual violence. But what I didn't speak about at that time were the struggles I was facing and continue to face related to mental health and also domestic violence. So I'm here today as sort of a continuation of my first speech that I gave. I want to be honest with you all today. It is not that I wasn't honest the first time that I gave my speech. Everything I said was true, but I wasn't being honest with myself at that time. So today is my chance to tell my story, but to tell the whole story and to the journey to healing that I have embarked on. I am coming to you both as a scholar of domestic violence and sexual violence, and also as a survivor of sexual violence and domestic violence. And I'm going to talk to you more today about what it means to be a survivor scholar. I know what we're going to talk about today is some tough things, but I'm hoping that by telling you the things that have happened to me in my life, that you will find hope in my story. My story is a story of resilience. Sometimes I even shock myself how much I'm able to bounce back from things. I'm approaching my story from the perspective of a scholar, and I want to try to help you learn and grow from the experiences that I had. I want to share the lessons that I have learned in the hope that you will have some good takeaways today, and I will give you some things to think about when it comes to being a survivor and supporting survivors. Today, I'm going to tell you my story. However, I cannot tell you my story without giving a little insight into the type of person that I am. I am an anxious person. In fact, my earliest memory is of having a panic attack. I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder around my 18th birthday, and I had also suffered from bouts of depression when I was growing up. My parents divorced when I was 12, and it was hard for me to adjust to the new situation I found myself in. I struggled with mental health problems all through childhood and my teenage years. This resulted in severe weight gain, and that took a toll on my adolescent self-esteem. These struggles spilled over into the classroom, and my grades suffered as a result. I had a really hard time getting into college. There weren't a lot of colleges that wanted to admit me because my grades were so low. Finally, after applying at what seemed like everywhere, I was admitted into the State University of New York at Oswego in 2001. I felt great about it, and it brought me a sense of relief. I was feeling better about myself and my future for the first time in a long time when I took off to Oswego. And the summer before I got to Oswego, I had a wonderful summer celebrating graduating high school with my high school friends. I was your typical college freshman. I was living away from home for the first time, and I was enjoying making new friends and attending my classes. But in addition to the traditional college activities I participated in, I made friends with some people who I would say like to, I'm going to put it in quotes, party. And I frequently went off campus to drink with my new friends. Not yet 21, we couldn't get into the bars, but for one bar in particular that had a reputation for allowing minors to drink. On a Thursday night in September of 2001, some new girlfriends and I went to that bar, and sure enough, they let us in without ID. We drank and danced until the bar closed. We left there very intoxicated. There was a young man who was at the bar that night. His name was Victor. Victor was a townie, and that's someone who lived in Oswego but didn't go to school there. Um, he was someone who one of my friends had met. I had seen him before this night, but I did not know him well, especially now that I think about it in hindsight. He danced and drank and hung out with us all night at the bar. At the end of the night, my friends and I were all getting in a cab to go back to campus, and Victor pulled me aside and offered me a ride home. He said it would save me money of having to pay for the cab. Now, I know if my friends were not so intoxicated, they probably would have objected, but they didn't. I told them that I had a ride, and I snuck away before they could even object. I was happy not to spend the money to pay for the cab ride home, and in my heart, I felt like my new friend in Victor was going to give me a ride home. In the end, this ride only saved me a $2 fare. Little did I know that this moment and decision would change the rest of my life. As soon as we got in the car, he said we needed to go to his aunt's house to feed her dog. It was 2 a.m., and I felt like this was strange, but I ignored that feeling, which I now recognize as my intuition, and went along for the ride. When we got to his aunt's house, there was a dog, so my mind was reassured at least for a little while. He asked if I wanted to see the house and mentioned that he had a room that he stayed at sometimes when he was there. Again, I remember thinking that I did not want to go upstairs in this house, but I ignored that feeling and followed him up the stairs. I walked into the room and was standing with my back to the door when I felt a shove from behind and I was thrown onto that bed. In that moment, I knew that I was in a bad situation, and in typical fashion, I immediately started blaming myself in that moment for getting myself into that situation. Over the next 6 hours, Victor raped and sexually assaulted me. I was very inexperienced with sexual activity prior to this. I had actually only had sex one time prior to this incident. I had seen sexual assaults on television and movies, but that was the only reference point I had. Nobody in high school or in college had sat down and had a discussion with me about sexual assault or sexual violence. In the movies, I saw people fight back, so in my head, I felt like I wanted to fight back too. But in that moment where I was being physically overpowered by this person, the more I resisted, the more physically aggressive he became. So I didn't fight. I didn't kick and scream. I didn't do what I thought people were supposed to do. I let the moment happen and did what I felt was best to get me out of the situation physically unharmed. I now recognize as a criminologist how common of an experience this is. A researcher by the name of Hopper, who's at Harvard Medical School, does research on how people react, or rather don't react, in situations of trauma such as sexual assaults. In Hopper's research, some of the participants report what is known as freezing, which is a brain response to detecting danger, especially a predator's attack. When you think about freezing, think about deer in headlights. This reaction occurs when the amygdala, which is a crucial structure in your brain's fear circuitry, detects an attack and signals the brainstem to inhibit movement. This all happens in a flash, automatically, and is beyond the conscious control of the person that it's happening to. While he me, I just kept telling myself what an idiot I was for going home with someone who I didn't know. By the time he stopped, it was daybreak. He told me to put my clothes on, and we got in his car so that he could drive me back to campus. We sat in silence on the ride back to the dorms. As we were on our way back to the dorms, he put his hand on my knee. It is one of the only times in my life that I have ever felt like my body was physically rejecting the touch of another person. I will never forget that moment for the rest of my life. It was almost like he was trying to apologize for what he did to me, or he wanted to make it seem like he had some type of good intention. When we got in front of the dorm, he reminded me that one of my friends had a crush on him and that she would be mad if she found out that him and I had had sex. He said that I should keep what happened to us a secret, and I agreed. I honestly, though, would have agreed to anything to get me out of the car at that moment. I got out and he drove off. I sat in front of my dorm and I smoked a cigarette, trying to process what had just happened to me. Now, I wish I could say this is where I told somebody about what happened, but like most sexual assault victims, I did not. In fact, it's estimated that over 90% of victims of sexual assault on college campuses do not report their assault, and that's a statistic from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. I had many reasons for not saying anything. First, I didn't want my new friend to know that I had had sex with her crush. I was worried she would no longer want to be my friend. Also, I believed that my parents would freak out and withdraw me from college if they found out what happened to me. So I decided to just keep it to myself. I knew about Plan B, which is the medication that you can take to prevent pregnancy, and I wanted to take it to be on the safe side. So I went over to the student health center. I talked to the doctor there. The doctor asked me what happened, but I couldn't get the words out to say what actually happened to me. I lied and said that the condom broke with my boyfriend, even though I didn't have a boyfriend at the time. They gave me my Plan B medication, and I decided to keep this to myself. This next part that I'm going to disclose to you is the first time that I've disclosed this in an open forum, but again, I'm disclosing this in the spirit of honesty. So I tried to put the incident behind me. However, a few weeks afterwards, I began to have pain in my genital area. The local emergency room doctor said I was positive for the herpes simplex virus, or HSV. There was medication I could take to help with the outbreaks, but there was no cure for HSV. I immediately went back to my dorm and I called my dad, who was the person I was closest to at this time. I told him everything. He replied, "You can't rape the willing, Renee." Like all victims who experience victim blaming, I was crushed. Since then, I've talked to my dad and we've talked about this a lot, and he has apologized for his reaction. Still, I want to be honest. His reaction really shut me down. I chose not to talk about my sexual assault with anyone to avoid any more negative reactions. So after my assault, even though I didn't report, I became determined to learn everything I could about rape and sexual assault. I went to the library on campus and I researched articles on the topic and read everything that I could get my hands on. I became fixated on the criminal justice system and what happened to survivors of sexual assault. It was around this time that I had another friend who was also sexually assaulted. This friend reported and she went through the criminal justice system, and I was able to support her as she went through the system. Supporting her provided insight into how the system treats survivors. By the end of my freshman year, I changed my major from music to criminal justice. And though I was not brave enough at the time to report the person who raped me, I knew I could help other rape victims by being an advocate. And ultimately, I determined the best way I could do this was to be a criminal justice professor and do research on rape and sexual assault. My survival became my mission. In the years following my assault, I tried to bury it as much as I could, but the physical harms endured. Initially, I had severe HSV outbreaks, so I took preventative medication to curb them. Still, every morning when I took my pill, I was reminded of what happened to me. Every time I had a new dating partner and had to disclose my HSV, I was reminded of that event. But despite these reminders, I carried on with this trauma always under the surface, and I tried my best to live a normal life. I guess you could say I just tried to bury it and move on. My thinking at the time was that if I just tried to not think about it or talk about it, then in my mind it might not even be real. I did what I've always done when I don't have control over the environment around me. I poured myself into my education, and that's been a theme for me. When I can't control what's happening in my life around me, I tend to turn to school because school has been the one thing in my life that I can always control. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2006, and I graduated with my PhD in 2012. I took my first teaching job at UNC Pembroke, where I'm now a tenured associate professor. My first year postgraduate school at UNC Pembroke was awesome. I loved connecting with my students and felt like I was fitting in well at my university. That spring, I was honored to be the recipient of something called the Last Lecture Award. The last lecture is named after Dr. Randy Pausch, who is a professor at Carnegie Mellon University who passed away, who gave an inspiring lecture to his students prior to his passing. I was asked to give a hypothetical lecture to current students. My only prompt was, if this was your last lecture to students, what would you want to say to them? I wanted so badly to be honest about the experiences that led me to become a criminologist, but I was very fearful of the repercussions of public disclosure. It was a struggle. Ultimately, I delivered my lecture in April of 2013, and I included a disclosure of my sexual assault. The audience clapped and applauded, much to my relief, and in that moment I was relieved. However, in the days that followed, I began to hear rumors that some of my colleagues were saying things about my disclosure. They were saying that it was inappropriate and that they would never have disclosed in a public manner. I felt self-conscious and doubted if I made the right decision to disclose. I also received an overwhelming number of positive messages, though, that praised me for my bravery and my strength in disclosing. So I tried to focus on the positive and ignore the negative, but it always loomed in the back of my head that people were whispering negative things about my lecture. My last lecture was recorded, so I was able to share it with my students in subsequent semesters. My last lecture became a way for me to disclose my sexual assault to my students. I had kind of felt prior to this that I was being inauthentic by not disclosing what happened to me, especially when it literally shaped who I am as an academic. But I found the more I disclosed that the more students began opening up to me about their sexual victimization. I found that I could hardly go a week or two without a student disclosing their sexual violence victimization to me. I did learn early on the importance of having resources available for students, and I quickly got to know the different offices on my campus that were available to assist students going through trauma. However, I did still feel conflicted about all of the disclosure that I was receiving. On one hand, I was so glad to be a source of support for young people going through traumatic events, as I wish I had somebody like myself to support me when I went through it as a student. But on the other hand, it was emotionally exhausting to have to hear traumatic stories over and over again and processing everyone else's trauma while trying to process my own trauma after being so public about it. It was all just so overwhelming. I now recognize having to manage the feelings of my students is something that we call in academia emotional labor. Emotional labor is something that many academics experience, but in particular, female academics experience at consistently high levels. As a non tenured female professor, the emotional labor of my students' trauma was a heavy burden to bear. In the years following my last year, I struggled with my mental health. I did my best to be normal, but deep down I felt that something was off with me. My family doctor had prescribed me antidepressants and medication for my anxiety, which had helped me some. I thought maybe I'm unhappy at work, right? So I applied for a job at a different institution. I was one of the final candidates in that job search, but ultimately I was not hired for the position. And I think this took a deeper toll on me than I recognized at the time. This is also around the time when I first started to realize that I was experiencing some domestic violence in my life. At the time, I was dating someone who was very unkind to me, and my mental health plummeted in the time that I was dating him. I now recognize the situation with him for what it was, emotional and mental abuse. It's not unusual that I didn't recognize it for what it was at the time. One study by Moreno in 2018 found that 57% of respondents report that it was difficult for them to distinguish the signs of emotional abuse. So I was struggling with my mental health all through 2015, and in September of 2015, this partner convinced me that the problem with me was my mental health medication. He made me start to question my own reality. Was that really what the problem was with me? Now I see that for what it is, and that is gaslighting, which is where you manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. He issued an ultimatum to me: Stop taking your medication or I'm dumping you. I stopped taking my medication that day. It didn't take long, or I didn't try to talk to the doctor. I didn't try tapering off on my medication. I just flat out stopped taking it. And within a few days of stopping taking it, I started to feel very bad. I was sad and anxious, and I cried all the time. My partner told me I was feeling that way because the medication was making its way out of my body and that I would feel better when it was over. I also, during this time, started to have some passive suicidal thoughts, such as, I wouldn't care if a bus hit me today. But then I started to think of plans for how I could kill myself, and I told myself that no one would care if I was dead. On a Friday night in October of 2015, my partner and I attended a wedding of one of his family members. We got into an argument at the wedding. We were both drinking and went home early. When we got home, he announced he was leaving me for good. I didn't plead or beg for him to stay. I just simply accepted it, and in the back of my mind, I knew what I was going to do. On his way out the door, I told him I would never see him again and to have a nice life. After he left, I drank a few shots of vodka, and I had decided that this was what was going to happen. This was going to be the moment. I was going to do what I had been thinking about doing for weeks. I went in my closet and picked up my strongest leather belt, and I hung myself in my closet. What happened after that is a blur to me. I lost consciousness and woke up to police all around me. When she picked him up, how the police had gotten there is when my partner's my partner left my house, he had his mother pick him up. When his mother had picked him up, they went to a local gas station, and at the gas station they saw a police officer there. His mother mentioned to the police officer that I had told her son that I was never going to see him again and that she was concerned for my safety, and they immediately dispatched officers to my apartment. I'm so thankful that my boyfriend's mother stopped at the gas station that night and that she stopped and asked for help. I'm so thankful that the help came. I would not be here today if it was not for their swift action. I was immediately taken to the local emergency room in an ambulance, and I was admitted to the psychiatric unit in the hospital that evening. Waking up in the hospital that next morning was surreal. The first 24 hours I was there, I slept a lot. But after that was over, I started to become anxious about work. You see, I was on the tenure track at that time. I didn't have tenure yet, and I felt the uneasiness of not having the security of that tenure. To put it plainly, I was afraid I would lose my job. Looking back, I should not have been worrying about my job in those days after the incident. I should have been worried about myself and getting my mental health better. I was able to contact my immediate supervisor and tell him that I wouldn't be in for a few days. I then did everything in my power I could to persuade my doctors and counselors to let me out of the facility. I begged them to let me go back to work, and they released me the following Tuesday. The doctor was hesitant, but I assured her that I would be getting follow-up services, and she let me go. So to recap, I tried committing suicide on a Friday, and I was back in the classroom the following Wednesday morning. Looking back, it all just seems really crazy to me. But again, I think it's a testament to the things that people will do to protect their job security. I remained single after the suicide attempt, and I tried to resume a normal life. I started seeing a new psychiatrist and a therapist, and I was starting to recover some sense of normalcy. But still, in the months that followed, I struggled more than I ever have in my whole entire life. Figuring out the right combination of medication for me to be on after my suicide attempt was very difficult. My doctor kept trying me on different medications, and some of them would have terrible side effects that would affect me at work. It would cause things like exhaustion, and nausea. I struggled to teach my classes and to grade assignments and just to get out of bed some mornings. After several months of weekly appointments, my psychiatrist suggested that I might want to do an outpatient hospitalization program. He said it would be the best environment for me to get my medication stabilized and also for me to undergo therapy to try and process what happened to me. He said the minimum amount of time I could expect to spend there was 4 weeks, and it could last anywhere up to 12 weeks. And I wanted to get the treatment, but again, I was worried. How could I take weeks off from work without that jeopardizing my job security? I'm not willing to disclose all of the specifics surrounding what I had to do to get time off from work. All I will state on the matter is that I will forever be grateful to the Human Resource Department at UNC Pembroke and also for the Family Medical Leave Act. The Family Medical Leave Act, or FMLA, provided me the security I needed to take time off of work to do what was best for my mental health. I'm not sure if the outcome would have been the same had it not been for FMLA. I used 6 weeks of FMLA and I was in treatment Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. The specific program that I was in was rooted in dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. This has been shown to be effective at decreasing suicidal and self-harm behaviors in randomized control studies. DBT therapy combines multiple therapeutic elements, but the one that I found to be the most important was the imposition of what they call mindfulness skills. DBT helped me learn to be more aware of things happening inside of me, such as my thoughts, my impulses, and my sensations. Rather than avoiding the feelings of anxiety and trauma like I had done my whole entire life, I learned to use my senses to tune into what was happening around me. I still did feel anxious during this process, but I was more aware of my psychological and physiological responses to anxiety. I learned to control the negative thoughts that had taken control in my mind so that they were no longer automatic to me. I learned more in those 6 weeks than I did in the 20 years prior to that. It was freeing in a sense. While I was still a trauma survivor, I didn't feel like my trauma had a death grip on my life anymore. A couple of years after my suicide attempt, I met my husband. I had been single since the attempt, so for a few years, and as I was pretty nervous about falling into a bad relationship again. My husband and I met online on an online dating site, and we had spent several months talking to each other before we ever decided to meet each other. When we did meet each other, we hit it off well, and we quickly started dating. When I look back on it now, the timeline was just so fast, faster than I could ever begin to even process. We met in April of 2017, and we decided to move in together in June of 2017. We moved in together in August of 2017, engaged in December of 2017. We were married in June of 2018. We went from not knowing each other to married in 16 months. And looking back, I realized that I barely knew the person I was quickly merging my life with. I was really wrapped up in this idea, though, that he was the one, and that after all the romantic struggles I had faced, that he was what I had been waiting for. It's easy to look back at the beginning of our relationship with rose-colored glasses, but there were some serious red flags that appeared in that first year that should have been a sign for me to think twice. First, he was a heavy drinker, heavier than I was, but I found myself starting to drink more so that I could keep up with him. It became the norm for us to drink five to six drinks 5 to 6 nights a week. We would also argue when we were drunk, especially when he was very drunk, and there were incidents where he would punch holes in walls and break things, and I would excuse it by saying he was just drunk and that he didn't mean it. I found myself lying to my closest friends about what was happening in my relationship because I was afraid that they would not like him and that they would judge me for staying with him. Shortly after we got married, he lost his job, and this began a cycle of unemployment and underemployment on his behalf. He was not making enough money to contribute towards the household, so I paid for all of our bills. I taught extra classes and picked up a side job at a hotel to make ends meet. During this time, he essentially treated me like an ATM. He'd demand I give him money to buy alcohol or whatever else he wanted, and would nag me and fight with me if I didn't, to the point where I just gave him what he wanted to avoid an argument. In the months leading up to our separation, he was out of work totally for many months and was drinking excessively all day, every day. And things came to a head in our relationship on Thanksgiving Eve in 2020, so just 11 months ago. I had had a dental surgery in November, and I was not drinking at the time because of it. He got very drunk the day before Thanksgiving and said some horrible things about my family and was screaming in my face. When I tried to get away, he wouldn't let me, and he got physical with me, throwing me to the ground and pinning me there. When I broke free, he squared up on me and tried to punch me in the face. I was able to get past him and run to the neighbor's house for help. So this might be the part where you're thinking, so you called the police, right? but I didn't call the police. I did what so many survivors of domestic violence do. I panicked and I froze. And despite the horrible things he did to me that night, in that moment, I didn't want him to get in trouble with the justice system. And I know this might not be the answer that you want to hear or were hoping to hear, but again, this is very common as most people who experience domestic violence do not report it. Researchers refer to this as the iceberg effect. Essentially, the official reports of domestic violence are just the tip of the iceberg, and there are so many reports that are left unaccounted for so many reasons. Some of the reasons that made it hard for me to leave include the fact that I was afraid of what he would do if I left, or what he would do if I truly made him leave for good. I loved my partner because he was not abusive all of the time. I was committed to the relationship. I had a belief that marriage was forever. I had an ideal in my mind of for better or for worse, right? I feel, and to a certain extent, at the time, I felt like the abuse was my fault, that I said or did things to make him be unkind to me. He left that night, and I knew in my heart that it had to be over with. When he was punching holes in the wall, I could excuse it for venting. When he was using me like an ATM, I could excuse it for having problems finding work during COVID. But I'll tell you, when someone squares up on you and tries to punch you in the face, there's just no coming back from that for me. Something about my relationship with my husband that I also want to mention is that in addition to drinking more, I just physically completely stopped caring about myself and my body. I gained 85 pounds over the course of a year and a half, and I outweighed my husband by a good 65 pounds. I guess in the back of my mind, I felt like since I weighed more than him and that I was taller than him, that I could protect myself from him if push ever came to shove. I realized the night that he pinned me to the ground that I could no longer protect myself from him. If he wanted to kill me in that moment, he could have. Knowing that fact changed me, and it changed us. And I knew what I needed to do. And I hired a divorce attorney the following week. What I've told you about today is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the dysfunction that took place in my house over the 3.5 years that we were together. I'm still processing a lot of what happened to me. It was hard for me to tell this part of my story as it's the first time I am talking about this in a public manner. But it's something that's so important to tell because I know that there are some of you listening who have dealt with this or are dealing with some of the issues that I have talked about today. When we think about domestic violence, there's a tendency to think about it in terms of just physical abuse, but the day-to-day emotional, mental, and financial abuse can also take a great toll on a person. And I also want to mention that I know I tell this story from a place of privilege. Not everyone has the financial means to leave their abuser. I was lucky to be the breadwinner, but so many people stay because they are afraid. They cannot afford to live life without their abuser's financial help. For those of you that can leave, my advice is to do it. Just leave. Run and never look back. It's so much better on the other side, where my life is peaceful and not chaotic. If you can't leave, I am deeply sorry, and I don't judge you for the decision you are making to stay. This is so important here. A lot of people don't realize how important their reaction to domestic violence survivors are. If someone tells you about domestic violence and they feel supported and encouraged, they might feel stronger and more able to make good decisions for themselves. If someone feels judged or criticized, they may close themselves off and be afraid to talk to people about their abuse. So the way you approach a survivor is very important. I've been separated for 11 months almost to the day, and a lot has changed for me in the past year. There were some friends I had who didn't have the first clue what was happening in my household, but still had the audacity to question my decision to leave my marriage. Some of these friends are no longer friends of mine because of this. I closed up my friend circle this year, and I really focused on nurturing the friendships that mattered the most to me. I didn't need to be judged for anything related to my relationship, and anyone who was judgmental is just no longer in my life. About a week before my husband and I broke up, I went to the doctor and they told me I weighed 232 pounds and that my cholesterol was double what it should have been. This past year, I have embarked on a journey to fitness. I stopped drinking daily and started watching what I eat. I started exercising regularly again, and I make sure to move for at least 30 minutes every day. And I'm happy to say that as of this morning, I am down 51 pounds this year. Not only do I look better, but I feel better too. My cholesterol is back to normal and all of my blood work is great at the doctor. I just decided I needed to actually care about my physical health a little bit too. And I'm telling you, you will be surprised what doing 30 minutes of activity 4 to 5 days a week will do for you, mind, body, and soul. Part of my journey to leveling up after this breakup has been for me to take a long, hard look at why I am dating and what is best for me in terms of my dating life right now. After the breakup, I initially tried some online dating again and just realized that it was too early or too soon for me to be doing that. There was this reaction I had, though, that I almost felt like I had to start dating right away because I didn't want to be alone. I felt like I had to keep putting myself out there, and that's just simply not the case. I don't have to make myself available for a dating relationship right now. This is just a reminder, though, to not be so quick to jump into a rebound relationship. Take the time you need to heal so that you can be in a better place when a good relationship does come along in the future. So, what I am hoping you will get from me telling my story today, one of the biggest things that I want you to get is that being a survivor is not a noun, it is a verb. It isn't something that you just do and get over. Being a survivor is something I have to continue to do every day of my life. It's become a part of who I am. When I think about trauma and how trauma appears and manifests in my life, I think about the analogy of a wrinkled piece of paper. So, trauma is like taking a piece of flat paper and rolling it up into a ball. When you roll a piece of paper up into a ball, it creates creases in the paper. No matter how hard you try to flatten the paper out, which is your attempts at healing, there will always be those wrinkle marks there from where the trauma happened. But rather than being ashamed of those wrinkles, I'm choosing to embrace them like a badge of honor. Some things that have helped me as a survivor. Again, first is to always prioritize your physical and mental health. I know too well what happens when you don't prioritize these things. Now that I know the importance of therapy, I will always be in therapy probably for the rest of my life. Remember, therapy is not only there for you when things go wrong, but it can also be there to help you recognize when things are going right. I've also been really focused on self care. I'm the first person that will tell someone to take care of themselves, but I sometimes am the last person to take my own advice. So again, exercise has become a form of self care for me. Um, some other things that I've done is I've learned not to make myself available for work 24/7, and I've set up some healthy boundaries in that regard. And I even do things like get myself a manicure every couple of weeks just to make myself feel better. Self care looks different for everybody, so find the things that make you happy and do them as often as possible. Prioritize your health because at the end of the day, you can't be the person you want to be if your physical and mental health is suffering. Another unexpected source of comfort for me has been my research. I am involved in a project called Survivor Criminology, which looks at the lived survival experiences of those of us who teach and research criminology and criminal justice. Many of us in the field in the academic field have pasts that include trauma and being survivors, and this text will highlight those personal struggles. In addition to survivor criminology, I'm working on a project where I'm looking at professors and their decision to disclose their sexual assault survivorship to their students. Between 2018 and 2020, I interviewed 33 college professors regarding their sexual assault disclosure to their students. Doing this study and hearing from others who are also in a similar situation to me was something I found to be very healing. It let me know that I was not alone in being a survivor who wants to use their experiences in the classroom. Overall, I just want to say I don't have all the answers for you today about the best way to be a survivor. All I can do is share with you where I'm at and what I'm doing and what is working for me in the hope that something I said today will be a help to you in the future. If I could say I want you to take one thing away from today, it's that being a survivor isn't a noun, it's a verb. I haven't survived, I am surviving. I make a choice every day to show up for myself and continue to survive the circumstances I find myself in. That is all I can hope that those of you in the audience today will do as well. Embrace your circumstances. Find a way to work and operate with the cards that life has dealt you. Remember, we can't change the circumstances around us, but we are always in control of our reaction to the things that happen to us. This is the first time in a public manner that I've talked about how mental health impacts me as an academic, but I have promised myself that this will not be the last time. No matter what the consequences are of telling my story, I'm going to face the world with my head held high because I am a survivor. I am not ashamed to be a survivor. To all survivors struggling with mental health, just know that I see you and I will do everything in my power to make your voices heard. You matter and your struggle matters, and please don't ever forget that. I'm trying to stop sharing here. I think I've stopped sharing.
You have. Thank you so much, Renee. I wanted to just take a minute and share a couple of the comments that have come through in the chat. As I know you haven't been able to follow the chat, I hope that everybody is able to do so. I wanted to just share a couple of the ideas here, and you can see them coming up on the screen as well. Andrea, I commend you for sharing your story. You are strong and brave. I believe there is healing in telling our stories and sharing our experiences. Never stop sharing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Next from Kay. Wow, I am honored to be able to hear your story. You having the strength and the courage to trust and to trust us and to be so transparent. Thank you. That's from Kay. Morgan, I really appreciate being able to hear your story. You are a phenomenal woman for releasing your experiences. Anicia, what an amazing story. And Isabel, I can relate in so many ways. Thank you for being the brave voice. Emma, thank you for sharing your story. And Elizabeth, thank you for sharing. Raja and Kendall, thank you for sharing your story. You are a strong woman and you are loved. Raja, so many important lessons here today that unfortunately aren't typically given to us in our education, but are so necessary for all people to learn. Thank you. We've got a few more here. Brittany, thank you for sharing your story. Dara, I feel very honored that you're able to share your story with us today. Amber, also echoing that same sentiment. Thank you for sharing your stories. DJ, thank you for sharing your story. I know it can be very hard to talk about such challenging things as this. You are so brave. Michelle, sharing my story and helping others through that disclosure has been one of the most powerful healing experiences I've had. Best of luck on your journey towards healing. You are not alone. Busy Bee, thank you for sharing. I think it's really admirable that you're helping and supporting students with similar experiences. And I just see so many thank yous throughout the chat, and I hope that you're able to just, despite not being physically present with each other, to just to feel all of the support and the gratitude that is pouring out from everyone who has heard your story.
Thanks, everybody. It really does mean a lot, especially, I've never, I'm going to be talking a lot more about the things that I've talked about now that I'm doing the survivor criminology, and I'm actually publishing kind of what I told you today is going to be published in a book. So it's kind of like this stuff is coming out and it's going to come to the surface. It just was a matter of when. I've never talked about my sexually transmitted disease. I've never talked about my domestic situations, and so I was being very vulnerable with you all this morning, and I just want to tell you how much it warms my heart to hear all the positive responses from you, because I was definitely had a sleepless night worrying about how it was going to go and how it was going to be received. You know what I mean? I think there's a part of you that knows that people are going to be supportive, but it's just always that fear part that you're just not 100% sure.
Absolutely. And we are just incredibly thankful. I also wanted to see if you'd be willing to answer some questions. There are a couple of questions that have come up in the chat. And I know we have a few minutes here. I think maybe about 10 minutes left in our stream. So this question is from Naomi. Do you have any tips on how to deal with gaslighting?
That is
dealing with this?
that is such a hard question. Because I wish that I could sit here and say, oh, I know exactly what you do when somebody gaslights you, but really the only thing I knew what to do was get away from the situation. That was the only way that it stopped, was me actually physically removing myself from that situation. But gaslighting can be very maddening, especially because the more you try to argue with the person that your reality is correct and that you aren't losing your mind, the more it makes you almost sound like you are losing your mind. Like when you never realize how you sound until you're sitting there trying to justify the things, like with my ex-husband, he used to say things and I would repeat back to him like, "Oh, why would you say this?" And then he would say, "I didn't say that. Like that's not what I said. That's not what I meant." And it's in that moment you're like, well, no, I just repeated the words back to you that you just said to me. And then they're like, they double down on the gaslighting, and then you double down on it because you feel like you're going crazy. You're like, I'm not crazy. I know what you just said to me. And the more you start to argue with that person, the more it makes you sound like you aren't in touch with your reality. Gaslighting is one of the most maddening behaviors. I would say probably a good thing you can do to deal with it is just recognize it and try to shut it down when you can. But I wouldn't recommend arguing with somebody who's trying to gaslight you. That's just going to further the gaslighting, and it's just going to frustrate you even more. But if you can, remove these people from your life. Like if you've people in your life that are making you question your sense of reality, if you can get rid of those people in your life, that's the best thing that you can do. I'm not sure if anybody else has any tips that they want to throw in there.
And certainly anybody feel free to jump in as well. And feel free to put your questions in the chat if you are an audience member here joining us today. And thank you. There it is on the bottom. If you have questions, just ask them in the chat. And I wanted to just turn it over real quick. I also see that Professor McElvaney has unmuted herself. So feel free to jump in.
I have a student who cheated and sent it through Teams, and I'll ask him why later. But he is asking, yeah, I will say there's a student that sends me a lot through Teams, so maybe it was just easier. He's asking if you feel that colleges are now more supportive than they used to be. And do you think that would have made a difference for you if you had gone to, and I don't think and he's got a note. He said, I don't mean it like victim blaming. So I think that's why he wanted to send it directly. But do you feel like that could have made a difference, and how?
Yes, I do. I had no idea. I went to high school in the 1990s, and our sex education was not talking about rape or sexual assault or sexual victimization. And then I had only had sex one time when I went to college. I had a boyfriend in high school for a couple of years. I lost my virginity to him. We had sex one time, and so I was rather I want to say innocent into a certain extent. Naive is probably a better word for it. I just didn't know about sex, and I didn't know about what happened. The only thing I had heard about sexual assault was what I had seen in watching. I was a fan of Law and Order, so like what I had seen on Law and Order was what I knew about sexual assault. And there was just the conversations that we have on college campuses, things like this, just weren't happening at the way that they are now. And I think that our views on, Title IX and also consent and a lot of these issues that come up that are in the forefront now, they just weren't being talked about 20 years ago when I first went to college. And so I definitely think if I had maybe been given, I don't know if it could have stopped it from happening, but maybe could have helped me process it and understand what was happening to me and given me different avenues to go through. Because like after my assault happened, I really didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? Nobody had ever told me what to do. Like it seemed like the only option was just to go to a police officer, and that seemed like too big for my little 18-year-old mind to take on. Now we all know, there are Title IX officers on campus, and there are different resources on campus, and that the first step doesn't have to be me going to the exam and submitting a rape kit. That there are other steps and other things that I could have done that I just had no idea about. So I would say, we're not perfect right now, right? I think that more students are getting exposed to topics of sexual violence on college campuses. I think more people are being exposed to it, but I don't think that we're perfect. And I think that there are still some college students that are coming in that are not getting the type of education and the type of information that they need. There are a lot of, it's not, I talked about this the last time I was at Week Tech. We had a whole conversation about consent and how important consent is. So I think that it's not just about learning about rape and sexual assault, but also learning about consent and some of these important things that are a part of being sexually active that I think we need to talk about more on college campuses.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to, I see a couple of other questions in the chat too, but I just wanted to ping in as well and echo what you're saying about social supports. And when you find yourself in that difficult situation, as a survivor yourself or as a supporter of someone, being willing to help connect people to resources is just huge. So thank you so much for all that you've said about that. You are a leader and you are a light. So thank you for sharing your mission
Thank you.
as a survivor and as a scholar. And I do see a couple more questions in the chat. And if we have time, I'll go ahead and add into that. I see that Michelle here has a question, and first she says she only had one piece of advice, and I think this is in reference to the gaslighting. If they won't admit after the fact and get help, immediately leave. So she was adding back in there. And Andrea says Henry Cloud and John Townsend had books on boundaries, which are great reads. Henry Cloud also has posts on Instagram with information on gaslighting. So sharing from our audience here. And Michelle, I'm noticing a lot of the names in this chat are typically female names. Do you have any suggestions on how to further engage male identifying persons in this conversation?
I think we need to start normalizing male sexual violence and recognizing men as victims of sexual violence. I think sometimes that we have historically kind of viewed it as only a man can rape a woman and not that a woman could rape a man, or that men could rape other men or anything like that. If you think about the history of think about our rape laws, right? For a really long time, in most the law basically said that rape was specifically, the insertion of a penis into a vagina and by force. And now we have these more encompassing definitions of rape that encompass other types of behavior. So I think that we need to start normalizing the fact that men can be victims of sexual violence too, and just creating safe spaces where they can come forward and where they can talk about things without fear of being ridiculed or being thought of as less than a man or any of these things that stop them from coming forward. So I think just helping to create safe spaces and environments for people to be able to talk about things in their own time, and just recognizing that male survivors of sexual violence are dealing with different things than female survivors of sexual violence are, just because of some of the gender role violations that happen sometimes when sexual assaults occur. So there's a whole nother layer on top of it that they have to think of. But just engaging them, giving them safe spaces, I think is very important.
And I do see one more question. I know that we need to wrap up, but I appreciate just you being willing to stay on with us for a little bit.
Yeah.
So from Morgan, do you have any advice on how to get over the feeling of guilt after leaving? a relationship and how to love yourself again. I've recently left a toxic relationship that was based on gaslighting.
Morgan, the best advice that I can give you is to just sit with those feelings and to allow yourself to have those feelings of guilt. I felt that left when I left Michael, because Michael made me feel like I was financially abandoning him because I was the breadwinner, and he made me feel like he at the time was driving one of my vehicles. I took that vehicle back. I was paying for all of his bills. I stopped paying for his bills. And he made me feel about as guilty as I possibly could. He would make me feel guilty about the fact that he was never going to see our pets again because I took custody of the pets after our separation. He would make me feel guilty about the pets. So I mean, he really laid it on thick for me there. And I really let myself sit with those feelings. I really owned those feelings of why am I feeling guilty right now? And when I really stopped to think about it, it was like, I don't really have a reason to feel guilty. Like, you put your hands on me, and as a result of your actions, I'm leaving. There's a consequence to your actions. And so I think that to experience those feelings and then afterwards really work on the self-care. So like the whole time that I was like experiencing these feelings of guilt for leaving and for ending my marriage, which I was trying so desperately to save, I started exercising 30 minutes every day, and I stopped drinking, and I started eating better, and I just started doing small things every day to take care and nurture myself. And that was really what helped me get over those guilty feelings, and what taught me how to love myself again was just making small decisions every single day to improve myself and make myself better. But I totally know that feeling of guilt. I would say sit with those feelings, don't run from those feelings, but not acting on those feelings. I felt very guilty, but I never said, "Oh, I'm so guilty that you should come back and live with me." I let myself feel the guilt, let myself make decisions based on the guilt, is I guess where I'm coming from with that.
Thank you so much. And I know that we are over time now, so I just want to make sure that I'm honoring that time. There are a few folks with some other comments in the chat as well. We can take those if you have time, Renee.
I do.
Okay. So we have a couple of other folks weighing in. Elizabeth about it's partly a parent's responsibility to teach their kids about safe sex, consent, and domestic violence, how to react and respond to these situations. And I think that really speaks to every person being educated and empowered to look out for the safety of people around them, in families, in larger campus communities, for sure. And Michelle also adding in here, part of the issue with consent is that people seem to think it's only related to sex, which is just not the case. We have to teach people consent on all levels.
I love that.
I do too. There have just been so many great ideas shared here this morning, and I just want to thank everyone who has participated and shared, especially Renee. But I also want to thank all the folks who are here on this call and having this conversation with us. I hope that you really took something away from today. And I also wanted to just make sure that we gave a little bit of a plug, and I see it appearing on the bottom of the screen there too. Thank you, Sarah. To join us at 2 p.m. For an event also on YouTube, another part of Promise Day, where we'll have Wake Tech Police, Title IX, and Wellness here to speak with us about all the resources there are on campus. And that kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier with our supports and looking out for each other. And really knowing what resources are available on campus, which is something I know I certainly didn't know as a student. So I am very thankful, and I know that all of us here at Wake Tech are incredibly thankful, Renee, Dr. Lamphere, for you sharing today.
Well, thank you so much. And if I can be a resource to anybody, if anybody needs help getting linked up with any resources, feel free to email me. My email is Renee, R-E-N-E-E, period, Lamphere, Lamphere, at uncp.edu. I want to consider myself a source of, I've got all sorts of resources and web links and different places, articles that I can share with you if you're looking for just information or statistics or anything. I have stuff that I can share with you. So I love interacting with students. I do this all for you, so feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you again. We so appreciate it. And just a quick thank you to Abby Ryder for helping us promote this on UNC-P. We really appreciate it. She's been with us from the beginning, so we already owe her 1,000 million thanks, and Temptations Capturing for everything.
And thanks for reaching out to us again. We love working with y'all.
And hope to see all of you at 2 o'clock today. Thanks again, and thank you, Dr. Lamphere.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.